In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a poisoned pen strikes, sending vicious letters that tear lives apart. Who hides behind the red question mark? When a gentle florist is found dead, is it suicide or murder? Join Miss Jane Marple as she unravels a web of greed, betrayal, and secrets, where every whisper hides a clue, and every shadow hides a killer. Will she catch the culprits before the poison spreads again? Chapter 1. The poison pen strikes the morning sun, draped St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, its light filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage. From her armchair by the window, she watched the village awaken, the milk cart rattling down High Street, Mrs. Pye's terrier yapping at a sparrow, and the postman, young Tommy Pierce, weaving his bicycle past the Blue Boar Inn. It was a scene of such familiar tranquility that Miss Marple, her knitting needles clicking softly, might have been lulled into complacency. But her eyes, sharp as polished agates, missed nothing, not the slight hesitation in Tommy's peddling, nor the faint frown creasing his brow as he clutched a bundle of letters. She set her knitting aside, a half-finished scarf in soft lavender wool, and poured herself a second cup of tea. The village had been unusually quiet of late, a fact that both pleased and unsettled her. St. Mary Mead, she knew, was a microcosm of human nature, and human nature seldom stayed quiet for long. As if to confirm her musings, a sharp rap at the door announced the arrival of her friend, Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife. "Jane, oh Jane!" Mrs. Clement burst in, her cheeks flushed beneath her sensible brown hat. "You'll never believe what's happened. It's dreadful, simply dreadful." She clutched a crumpled envelope, her fingers trembling as she thrust it toward Miss Marple. Miss Marple took the envelope with a calm that belied her curiosity. It was plain, white, and addressed to the vicar in a neat, almost mechanical script. The postmark was local, stamped 2 days prior. "Do sit down, Margaret," she said, gesturing to the chintz-covered sofa, "and tell me what has you in such a state." Mrs. Clement sank onto the sofa, her breath coming in short gasps. "It's a letter, Jane, a horrible, wicked letter. It accuses Leonard, my Leonard, of, I can scarcely say it, an affair with Mrs. Grayson from the grocer's. It's nonsense, of course, but so viciously worded. Who could write such a thing?" Miss Marple slit the envelope with a silver letter opener and unfolded the single sheet inside. The words, typed in stark black ink, leaped out with a gleeful cruelty. "Dear Vicar, your sanctimonious sermons fool no one. The village knows of your late-night trysts with Mrs. Grayson. How does it feel to preach virtue while living in sin?" The signature was absent, replaced by a single taunting flourish, a question mark in red ink. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, not in shock but in recognition of a calculated mind at work. "This is no idle prank," she murmured, her fingers tracing the precise edges of the typed letters. The writer took care to disguise their hand. A typewriter, Margaret hardly a common tool in St. Mary Mead. Mrs. Clement wrung her hands. "But who, Jane? Who would do this? Leonard is beside himself. He says we must ignore it, but what if more come? What if the village believes it?" Miss Marple's gaze softened, though her mind was already sifting through possibilities. "Let us hope it is an isolated act," she said, though her tone suggested she doubted it. "But we shall be prudent. May I keep this letter for now? I'd like to examine it further." Mrs. Clement nodded, relief flickering in her eyes. "Of course. Jane, I knew you'd know what to do. You always see things others miss." As Mrs. Clement left, promising to return for tea later, Miss Marple settled back with the letter. She held it to the light, noting the faint watermark of a local stationer's brand. The red question mark entreated her most a theatrical touch, suggesting a writer who craved attention yet hid in shadows. She tucked the letter into her writing desk, her thoughts turning to the village's undercurrents. St. Mary Mead, for all its charm, harboured its share of grudges and secrets by noon. The village was abuzz with whispers. Miss Marple, strolling to the post office to collect her own mail, overheard snippets of conversation outside the Blue Boar. Mrs. Price Ridley, her fox fur askew, was holding court with the butcher's wife, Mrs. Tuttle. I received one myself, Mrs. Price Ridley declared, her voice carrying a mix of outrage and relish. Accusing me of cheating at last month's whist drive. The nerve. Mrs. Tuttle, her apron dusted with flour, clutched a similar envelope. Mine says, I've been watering down the milk. As if I'd stoop so low. My husband's fit to burst. Miss Marple paused ostensibly to adjust her hat, but her ears caught every word. 2 more letters, both typed, both malicious. The pattern was emerging, and it was not random. She entered the post office, where Miss Finch, the postmistress, was sorting letters with a distracted air. Her thin fingers fumbled a parcel, and her eyes darted nervously as Miss Marple approached. "Good morning, Miss Finch," Miss Marple said brightly. "Quite a busy day, I imagine, with all this correspondence." Miss Finch's smile was brittle. "Oh yes, Miss Marple. Everyone's in a tizzy. I can't think where these awful letters are coming from." Her voice wavered, and she dropped a stack of envelopes, scattering them across the counter. Miss Marple bent to help, her fingers brushing a letter addressed to Miss Hartnell, the schoolteacher. It bore the same neat script as the vicar's. "How distressing," she said, handing it back. "Have you noticed anything unusual about the post lately? Odd hours, perhaps, or unfamiliar faces?" Miss Finch shook her head too quickly. "No, nothing at all, just the usual deliveries." But her eyes flickered to the back room, where a typewriter sat under a dust cover. Miss Marple smiled benignly and collected her Malheur gardening catalogue and a letter from her nephew Raymond. As she left, she noted the postmistress's agitation. Miss Finch was not a suspect yet, but her nerves suggested she knew more than she let on at the vicarage that afternoon. Miss Marple joined Mrs. Clement and a small gathering of the afflicted. Reverend Leonard Clement, his face pale but composed, welcomed her with a strained smile. Mrs. Grayson, the grocer's wife, sat rigid, her eyes red-rimmed. Miss Hartnell, clutching her own letter, read aloud in a quavering voice, "Your pupils deserve better than a thief who skims their parents' fees." "It's monstrous," Mrs. Grayson burst out. "I've done nothing but run my shop honestly, and now this lies about me and the vicar." She shot a guilty glance at Reverend Clement, who cleared his throat awkwardly. Miss Marple listened, her hands folded in her lap, her expression one of polite concern, but her mind was cataloguing details, the letter's uniformity, the choice of targets, the escalation from gossip to accusations of theft and betrayal. "It seems," she said at last, "that someone wishes to unsettle us all. But why? To amuse themselves, or to conceal something deeper?" The room fell silent. Reverend Clement rubbed his temples. "I've urged everyone to burn these letters and forget them, but I fear they'll keep coming. And that," Miss Marple said softly, "is precisely what the writer wants. To be ignored would defeat their purpose. They crave reaction, anger, division." Mrs. Grayson shivered. "But who could hate us so much? I've never harmed a soul." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Hatred is not always personal, my dear. Sometimes it's a game played by one who feels powerless. Otherwise, as the gathering dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, accepting a second scone from Mrs. Clement. She steered the conversation to village newcomers. Learning of a reclusive widow, Mrs. Lestrange, who had rented the old mill cottage, keeps to herself, Mrs. Clement said, though I saw her mailing a parcel yesterday. Odd woman, always in black, like she's in mourning. Miss Marple filed this away, her thoughts returning to the typewriter at the post office. Typewriters were rare in St. Mary Mead, but not impossible to access. The Manor, Ashford Hall, had one in its library, she recalled, and the doctor's surgery might have another. She resolved to visit both, under some pretext, to narrow her list. That evening, as twilight settled over the village, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the vicar's letter spread before her. She examined it with a magnifying glass, noting the crisp alignment of the letters, the faint smudge of red ink on the question mark. It was no amateur's work. The writer had planned carefully, choosing a machine that could not be traced by handwriting, yet adding the red flourish as a signature of sorts. It was a clue, she thought, to a personality both meticulous and theatrical. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Tommy Pierce, the postman, stood at her door, his cap askew. "Evening, Miss Marple," he said, shifting nervously. "I thought you should know another letter came in late today, addressed to Lady Ashford at the Manor. I didn't open it, but it looked like the others." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. "Thank you, Tommy. You've done well to tell me. Was it posted locally?" "Yes, ma'am. Dropped in the box outside the post office last night," Miss Finch said. She thanked him with a shilling and a smile, then closed the door, her mind racing. Lady Ashford, the village's grand dame, was an unlikely target, wealthy, aloof, and above gossip. This letter suggested the writer's ambition was growing, reaching beyond the village's humbler folk. It was a bold move, and boldness, Miss Marple knew, often led to mistakes. She returned to her chair, picking up her knitting but not working it. The letters were a web, she thought, spun to entangle as many as possible, but webs could be traced to their spinner. She would start with the typewriter, then follow the trail of ink red and black. For now, she folded the vicar's letter and slipped it into a drawer, its red question mark winking like a challenge. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing the first thread of the mystery was in her hands, and she would not let it slip. The village slept, but Miss Marple's mind did not. Tomorrow she would call on Lady Ashford, perhaps with a jar of her homemade marmalade as an excuse. She would watch, listen, and piece together the fragments of St. Mary Mead's latest scandal. The poison pen had struck, but Jane Marple was ready to strike back. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Tishuptha, morning after the vicarage gathering. St. Mary Mead shimmered under a veil of mist, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in a tweed shawl, stepped out of her cottage, a basket of late-blooming roses tucked under her arm. Her destination was the village tea shop, a hub of gossip where she hoped to gauge the letter's ripple effect. The poison pen, she mused, thrived on chaos, and chaos left traces overheard words, unguarded glances, a slip of the tongue. High Street bustled quietly, its rhythm unchanged yet tinged with unease. Outside the butcher's, two women huddled, their voices low but urgent. Miss Marple caught fragments, another letter, poor Dr. Harrow, before they fell silent at her approach. She smiled benignly, her eyes noting their flushed cheeks and the envelope one clutched its corner, peeking from a coat pocket. The letters were spreading, she thought, like ripples from a stone tossed into a pond. The tea shop, a cosy nook called the Copper Kettle, was half full when she entered, its air thick with the scent of scones and Darjeeling. Mrs. Bantry, a friend from nearby Gossington Hall, waved her over to a corner table. "Jane, you're a sight for sore eyes," she said, pushing a plate of shortbread forward. "This village is positively crawling with scandal. Have you heard about Dr. Harrow?" Miss Marple settled into a cushioned chair, her basket at her feet. "Only whispers," she said, her tone inviting confidences. "Do tell, Dolly." Mrs. Bantry leaned in, her eyes bright with the thrill of news. "He got one of those beastly letters yesterday. Accused him of botching old Mr. Carter's surgery last spring. Pure nonsense, of course. Arthur says Harrow's the best doctor we've had in years, but the letters got him rattled. He nearly cancelled his rounds today." Miss Marple's fingers paused on her teacup, her mind filing away the detail. Dr. Harrow, young and earnest, was an unlikely target for such a specific charge. "Was it typed, like the others?" she asked. "Oh yes," Mrs. Bantry said, lowering her voice. "And that wretched red question mark at the bottom. I saw it myself. Harrow showed it to Arthur at the golf club. Whoever's doing this has a flair for the dramatic." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to the other patrons. At a nearby table, Mrs. Price Ridley, her hat adorned with a wilting peacock feather, was lecturing Miss Hartnell. "I've written to the chief constable," she declared, her voice carrying. "These letters are a public menace. Mine accused me of bribing the flower show judges. Me, of all people." Miss Hartnell, her face pinched, clutched a handkerchief. "Mine was worse," she whispered. "It said I've been forging school records. The parents are starting to ask questions. I can't sleep, Mrs. Ridley, I simply can't." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. The letters were growing bolder, targeting reputations with surgical precision. She glanced toward the counter, where the tea shop's owner, Miss Weatherby, a wiry woman with sharp eyes, was serving a tray of cakes. Miss Weatherby's hands trembled slightly, and her smile was strained as she nodded to a customer. Miss Marple made a mental note Miss Weatherby had not mentioned a letter, but her nerves suggested she might be hiding one. As Mrs. Bantry chatted about the flower show, Miss Marple's attention shifted to a lone figure by the window. Mrs. Lestrange, the reclusive widow from the mill cottage. She sat with a cup of untouched tea, her black veil obscuring half her face. Her gloved hands rested on a small parcel tied with twine. Miss Marple recalled Mrs. Clement's remark about Mrs. Lestrange mailing a parcel. Could she be connected to the letters? Her isolation made her an enigma, and enigmas, Miss Marple knew, often held secrets. The door jingled, admitting a new arrival. Mr. Pock, the village constable, his uniform slightly askew. He approached Mrs. Price Ridley's table, hat in hand. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice low but audible to Miss Marple's keen ears. "I've looked into your complaint, but without evidence, there's little I can do. The post office says the letters are posted locally, but no one's seen anything odd." Mrs. Price Ridley huffed. "Evidence. The village is drowning in evidence. Someone's typewriter is clacking away, and you're twiddling your thumbs." Mr. Pock flushed, mumbling an apology before retreating. Miss Marple watched him go, noting his discomfort. Constable Pock was honest, but out of his depth. She would need to pursue her own inquiries, starting with the post office and its typewriter. Mrs. Bantry excused herself to greet a friend, leaving Miss Marple to sip her tea and observe. The tea shop hummed with tension, each whispered conversation a thread in the village's unravelling fabric. She overheard a young couple at the next table, their heads bent close. "I told you, Tom," the woman said, "that letter about your sister wasn't a joke. Someone saw her with that man from Mead." Tom, a ruddy-faced farmhand, scowled. "It's lies, Jenny. But if I find who wrote it, they'll regret it." Miss Marple's heart sank slightly. The letters were not just wounding individuals, but fraying the villagers' trust. She resolved to act swiftly before tempers flared into violence. Finishing her tea, she gathered her basket and approached Miss Weatherby at the counter, her smile disarming. "Such a lovely spread today, Miss Weatherby," she said, gesturing to the cakes. "You must be run off your feet with all this talk of letters. Have you been spared, I hope?" Miss Weatherby's eyes flickered, her hands pausing on a teapot. "Oh, I've no time for such nonsense, Miss Marple," she said, her voice too bright. "Just trying to keep the shop running." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on a smudge of red ink on Miss Weatherby's apron. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it sent a tingle through her. "I'm sure you're right," she said kindly, "though if you hear anything, do let me know. These things have a way of sorting themselves out." As she left the tea shop, Miss Marple's mind buzzed with fragments. Dr. Harrow's letter, Mrs. Lestrange's parcel, Miss Weatherby's ink-stained apron. She decided to visit the post office next, hoping to charm more details from Miss Finch. The typewriter there was a tantalizing lead, and she needed to confirm its use. The post office was quiet, its wooden counter polished to a gleam. Miss Finch, her hair pinned tightly, was sorting stamps with a distracted air. She started slightly as Miss Marple entered, her smile faltering. "Miss Marple, what a surprise. Just collecting your mail." "Among other things," Miss Marple said, her tone light. She placed her basket on the counter, pulling out a small package of old letters tied with ribbon. "I thought I'd post these to my nephew Raymond Hees, researching family history, but I'm hopeless with stamps. Could you help?" Miss Finch obliged, her movements jerky. As she weighed the package, Miss Marple leaned closer, her eyes straying to the back room. The typewriter was still under its cover, but a sheet of paper protruded slightly, its edge curled. "You must be terribly busy," she said, "with all these letters going about. Have you noticed when they're posted? Early morning, perhaps, or late at night?" Miss Finch's fingers fumbled a stamp, dropping it to the floor. I haven't kept track," she stammered, bending to retrieve it. "People come and go all day. I can't watch everyone." "Of course not," Miss Marple said soothingly, "though I imagine you see more than most. For instance, that parcel Mrs. Lestrange sent, was it heavy? I'm always curious about what people send." Miss Finch's eyes widened slightly. "Mrs. Lestrange? Oh, it was just a small thing. Books," she said. "Posted to London yesterday." Miss Marple smiled, tucking the information away. Books could be a cover for anything letters, perhaps, or worse. She paid for her stamps and lingered a moment, pretending to adjust her scarf. "One last thing," she said. "That typewriter of yours, does anyone else use it? For official forms, perhaps?" Miss Finch's face paled. "No, it's just for post office business. I keep it locked away." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions deepening. Miss Finch's denials were too emphatic, her nerves too raw. She thanked her and left, her steps slow as she processed the encounter. The typewriter was a key, but accessing it would require finesse. She decided to visit Ashford Hall next, to inquire about Lady Ashford's letter and probe the manor's own typewriter. The walk to Ashford Hall took her past the village green, where children played under the watchful eye of Miss Hartnell. The schoolteacher's face was drawn, her eyes darting to every passer-by. Miss Marple paused, offering a sympathetic smile. "A trying time, Miss Hartnell," she said. "I hope you're managing." Miss Hartnell's lips trembled. "Barely, Miss Marple, the parents are whispering, and I can't prove the letter's lies. I've taught here 20 years. Why now?" Miss Marple patted her arm. "Truth has a way of rising, my dear. Keep your chin up." She moved on, her heart heavy but her resolve firm. The letters were a poison, and she was determined to find the source. Ashford Hall loomed at the village's edge, its ivy-clad walls imposing yet weathered. The butler, a stoic man named Hodges, admitted her with a bow. "Lady Ashford is in the drawing-room," he said. "She's expecting you." Miss Marple had sent a note ahead, mentioning the marmalade as her excuse. She found Lady Ashford by a roaring fire, her silver hair gleaming under a chandelier. The lady's eyes were sharp, her posture regal despite her age. "Miss Marple," she said, gesturing to a velvet chair, "your marmalade is always a treat, but I suspect you're here about that wretched letter." Miss Marple set her basket down, her expression grave. "You've received one, then?" Lady Ashford handed her an envelope, its script identical to the others. The letter inside was brief but vicious. "Your ladyship's secrets won't stay buried. The village knows of your hidden heir." The red question mark was bold, almost mocking. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. A hidden heir was a serious accusation, one that could append the manor's legacy. "This is troubling," she said, folding the letter. "Have you any idea what it refers to?" Lady Ashford's lips thinned. "None. My son died in the war, and my husband left no other heirs. It's a cruel fabrication, but I won't dignify it with worry." Miss Marple admired her composure, but sensed a flicker of unease. She steered the conversation to lighter topics, mentioning the manor's library. "I've always envied your collection," she said. "And that splendid typewriter, do you still use it?" Lady Ashford raised an eyebrow. "Rarely. It's mostly for estate correspondence. My secretary, Miss Gale, handles it." Miss Marple noted the name. Miss Gale, a newcomer to the manor, was another thread to tug. As she rose to leave, she glanced at the desk, where a stack of paper bore the same watermark as the vicar's letter. It was a small clue, but it tightened the web. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp and spread her notes on the table. She sketched a timeline of the letter's postings, based on Miss Finch's reluctant admissions and Tommy Pierce's tip. Most were dropped late at night, suggesting a writer who moved in shadows. She listed her suspects: Miss Finch, with her typewriter access; Mrs. Lestrange, with her mysterious parcel; Miss Weatherby, with her inky apron; and now Miss Gale, tied to the manor's machine. The village was a chessboard, she thought, and the poisoned pen was a rogue piece, striking without pattern, or so it seemed. But patterns emerged with patience, and Miss Marple had patience in spades. She tucked her notes away, satisfied with her day's work. Tomorrow she would probe deeper, perhaps visiting Dr. Harrow or Miss Gale. For now she picked up her knitting, her needles clicking like a metronome, her mind weaving a net to catch a spider. Chapter 3. The Shadow of Suspicion. The dawn light crept over St. Mary Mead. casting long shadows across the dew-damp lanes. Miss Jane Marple, awake earlier than usual, stood at her garden gate, pruning her late roses with a pair of delicate shears. Her hands moved with practiced care, but her eyes roamed the village, alert for any sign of unrest. The poison pen letters, she knew, were a spark in dry grass, and sparks could ignite tempers as easily as gossip. Her visit to the tea shop yesterday had confirmed the letters reached Dr. Harrow, Miss Hartnell, Lady Ashfordand. She sensed the writer was growing bolder, their web tightening round the village's heart. As she snipped a wilted bloom, a figure hurried past. Mr. Grayson, the grocer, his shoulders hunched under a worn coat. His face, usually ruddy with good cheer, was drawn, and he clutched a crumpled envelope in one hand. Miss Marple's heart sank. Another letter, she thought, and likely a cruel one. She called out softly, "Good morning, Mr. Grayson. A fine day, isn't it?" He started, his eyes darting to her before softening. "Oh, Miss Marple, fine, yes, I suppose." His voice was flat, and he tucked the envelope into his pocket, as if to shield it from her gaze. "Just off to open the shop." She smiled, her expression warm but probing. "You look troubled, if I may say so. Nothing serious, I hope." Mr. Grayson hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with his cap. "It's one of those letters, ma'am. Got it this morning. Says I've been tampering with my good sort weighing flour, watering syrup. It's lies, all of it, but if word gets out..." His voice cracked, and he looked away, toward the village green dot. Miss Marple's lips pursed, her mind racing. The accusation was specific, designed to ruin a tradesman's livelihood. "How dreadful," she said, her tone soothing. "May I see it? I've been helping the vicar with these matters, you know." Reluctantly, Mr. Grayson handed her the envelope. It bore the familiar typed address, the local postmark, and that taunting red question mark. The letter inside was viciously concise. "Your customers deserve better than a cheat, Grayson. How long before they learn you've been robbing them blind?" The paper was crisp, the watermark matching the others she'd seen. She noted a faint smudge on the corner, as if the writer had handled it carelessly. "This is no small matter," she said, folding the letter carefully. "But you mustn't let it prey on you. The writer wants fear, Mr. Grayson. Don't give it to them." He nodded, his jaw tight. "I'll try, ma'am. But my wife's in a state, and business is already slow. If folks believe this, they won't," Miss Marple said firmly, though she knew gossip spread faster than truth. "Keep this quiet for now, and I'll look into it. We'll find the culprit, I promise." Mr. Grayson thanked her, his relief palpable, and shuffled off toward his shop. Miss Marple watched him go, her thoughts turning to the letter's intent. It wasn't just malice, it was strategic, targeting the village's pillars, the vicar's morality, the doctor's competence, the grocer's honesty. She slipped the letter into her handbag, resolving to visit Grayson's shop later. First, she needed to attend the village meeting, called by Mrs. Price Ridley to address the letter. Crisis. The meeting was set for noon at the village hall, a squat building beside the church. Miss Marple arrived early, her knitting bag in hand, and took a seat near the back, where she could observe without drawing attention. The hall filled quickly, the air thick with murmurs and sidelong glances. Mrs. Price Ridley stood at the podium, her fox fur bristling with indignation. Beside her sat Reverend Clement, his face pale but composed, and Mr. Polk, the constable, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Price Ridley began, her voice ringing with authority. "We are under siege. These anonymous letters are a blight on St. Mary Mead, and I, for one, will not stand for it." She brandished her own letter, its red question mark, visible even from Miss Marple's seat. "This accuses me of rigging the whist drive. Me, it's slander, and I demand action." The crowd stirred, some nodding, others whispering. Miss Hartnell, near the front, clutched her handbag, her eyes red-rimmed. Dr. Harrow, standing by the wall, crossed his arms, his jaw tight. Miss Marple's gaze swept the room, noting absences. Mrs. Lestrange, Miss Weatherby, and Miss Finch were nowhere to be seen. Their absence was as telling as their presence might have been. Reverend Clement rose, his hands raised for calm. "We mustn't let these letters divide us," he said, his voice steady despite his pallor. "They're the work of one troubled soul, and we'll overcome this with unity." Unity. Mrs. Grayson, the grocer's wife, stood, her voice trembling. "My husband's been accused of cheating his customers. How do we stay united when our good names are dragged through the mud?" The room erupted in crosstalk, accusations flying. "I heard Miss Hartnell's been skimming fees," someone called. "And what about Dr. Harrow's mistake with Mr. Carter?" another shouted. Miss Marple's heart sank. The letters were doing their work, turning neighbour against neighbour. She rose, her small figure commanding attention despite her soft voice. "If I may," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "These letters thrive on our discord. The writer wants us to suspect each other, to tear ourselves apart. But suspicion is a trap. We must look for facts, not rumours." The crowd quieted, her words cutting through the clamour. Mrs. Price Ridley sniffed, but nodded. "Well said, Miss Marple. But what facts do we have? Constable Polk, have you nothing to report?" Mr. Polk cleared his throat, his face reddening. "I've checked the post office, ma'am. The letters are posted locally, mostly at night. But there's no trace of who drops them. Miss Finch says she's seen nothing unusual." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Miss Finch's denials were consistent, but her nerves suggested otherwise. She made a mental note to press her further, perhaps with a different approach. For now, she steered the conversation. "Perhaps," she said, "we might consider the typewriter. Not many in the village have one, surely." The suggestion hung in the air, sparking murmurs. Dr. Harrow spoke up, his voice clipped. "There's one at my surgery, but it's locked in my office. No one's touched it. And one at Ashford Hall," Lady Ashford added, her voice cool from the front row. "My secretary uses it, but I trust her implicitly." Miss Marple smiled faintly, filing away the defensiveness in their tones. The typewriter was a nerve, and touching it had rattled more than one person. The meeting ended with no resolution. Only a promise from Mr. Pock to keep an eye out. As the crowd dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, watching faces. Mrs. Grayson clung to her husband, whispering fiercely. Miss Hartnell slipped out alone, her shoulders bowed, and Dr. Harrow paused at the door, glancing back as if expecting pursuit. She approached Mr. Grayson, who stood by the tea-urn, his face still pale. "I'll stop by your shop this afternoon," she said quietly. "We'll sort this out, never fear." He nodded, his gratitude silent but deep. Miss Marple left the hall, her steps deliberate as she headed toward Grayson's shop. The village was a cauldron now, and she needed to stir carefully, lest the contents boil over. Grayson's shop, a tidy storefront with jars of sweets and sacks of flour, was empty when she arrived. Mr. Grayson was behind the counter, weighing out tea for a lone customer, Mrs. Tuttle, the butcher's wife. She was mid-draught, her voice sharp. "I got one too, you know," she said, waving an envelope. "Says I've been selling spoiled meat. Spoiled. My husband's ready to sue whoever wrote it." Miss Marple paused by a shelf of tinned peaches, pretending to browse. Another letter, she thought, and another trade targeted. The writer was methodical, striking at the village's economic roots. She waited until Mrs. Tuttle left, then approached the counter, her basket swinging lightly. "Mr. Grayson," she said, "I've been thinking about your letter. Have you any enemies? Perhaps someone who might hold a grudge?" He shook his head, his hands gripping the counter. "None, Miss Marple. I've run this shop fair and square for 20 years. But I did find something odd." He reached under the counter and produced a receipt, crumpled and ink-stained. "This was in the till yesterday. It's for a bottle of ink black, not the blue we use. I didn't buy it, and my wife swears she didn't either." Miss Marple's pulse quickened as she took the receipt. It was from a stationer in Much Benham, dated 3 days ago. The ink was a clue, tying the letters to someone who'd gone out of their way to buy it. "This is most helpful," she said, tucking it into her bag beside the letter. "May I keep it?" "Of course," he said, his voice hopeful. "Do you think it means something?" "I think," she said, her eyes twinkling, "that every detail matters. Now I'll take a 1/4 pound of your best tea, if you please." As he weighed the tea, Miss Marple's gaze roamed the shop, landing on a small desk in the corner. A ledger lay open, its pages filled with neat figures, but beside it was a blotter with a faint red smudge. It was identical to the ink on the letters, question marks. She resisted the urge to touch it, instead smiling as Mr. Grayson handed her the tea. "You've been most kind," she said. "I'll let you know what I find." Outside, the village hummed with its usual rhythm, but Miss Marple sensed the undercurrent of fear. She decided to detour past Dr. Harrow's surgery, hoping to catch him between patients. The surgery, a converted cottage with a brass plaque, was quiet, its waiting room empty. Dr. Harrow himself answered her knock, his face weary but polite. "Miss Marple," he said, ushering her in. "I suppose you're here about the letter." She nodded, taking the offered chair. "I heard about it at the tea shop. May I ask what it said?" He sighed, pulling an envelope from his desk. "It accuses me of negligence in Mr. Carter's surgery, says I caused his death. It's absurd I did everything by the book, but mud sticks, doesn't it?" Miss Marple read the letter, noting its familiar script and red flourish. "Your scalpel slipped, Doctor. Mr. Carter paid the price. How many more will suffer?" The accusation was grave, and she saw the toll it took in Harrow's shadowed eyes. "This is cruel," she said, handing it back. "But I wonder, have you noticed anyone lingering near your surgery? Or anything missing, perhaps?" He frowned, thinking. Nothing missing, but there was a patient last week, a stranger. Said he was passing through. Asked odd questions about my equipment, including the typewriter. I thought he was just curious. Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "Can you describe him? Middle-aged, thin, dark coat. Kept his hat low. I didn't get a good look." Harrow paused, then added, "He left a card though, said he was a salesman. I tossed it, I'm afraid." She hid her disappointment, her mind already turning to the stranger. A salesman could be a cover, a way to scout the village unnoticed. "No matter," she said. "You've been most helpful. Keep your "Spirits up, Doctor." As she left the surgery, the sky darkened with gathering clouds, mirroring the village's mood. Miss Marple's thoughts churned. The ink receipt, the red smudge, the stranger at the surgery. The pieces were scattered, but she felt them aligning, like stars forming a constellation. She returned home, her steps brisk despite the ache in her knees. That evening, as she sat by her fire, a knock startled her. Tommy Pierce, the postman, stood at her door, his face pale under the lamplight. "Miss Marple," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "I found something in the postbox. Tonight, another letter, addressed to you." Her heart skipped, but her voice was calm. "To me, Tommy? How extraordinary. May I have it?" He handed her an envelope, its script chillingly familiar. She thanked him, sending him off with a peppermint from her tin, then closed the door. Her fingers steady as she slit the letter open. The words inside were a cold jolt. "Keep your nose out, old woman, or you'll regret it. The village has enough secrets without your meddling." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, not of fear but of satisfaction. The writer had noticed her, which meant she was closer than she dared hope. She tucked the letter into her desk, beside the others, and picked up her knitting, her needles clicking with renewed purpose. The shadow of suspicion had fallen on her, but Jane Marple was no stranger to shadows. She would step into them, unafraid, and drag the poison pen into the light. Chapter 4. The manor's secret. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead like a shroud, softening the edges of Ashford Manor's ivy-draped walls as Miss Jane Marple approached its iron gates. Her basket, laden with a jar of her finest damson jam, swung lightly on her arm, a pretext for her visit to Lady Ashford. The letter she'd received last night, with its chilling warning and red question mark, lay tucked in her handbag, a silent spur to her resolve. The poison pen had marked her as a threat, and that, she thought, was a mistake. Threats betrayed fear, and fear betrayed a trail. The manor's gravel drive crunched under her sensible shoes, each step measured as she rehearsed her approach. Lady Ashford's letter, accusing her of hiding an heir, hinted at a deeper motive. Perhaps revenge. Miss Marple's mind, sharp as her pruning shears, sifted through the village's web. Miss Finch's nervous denials, Miss Weatherby's inky apron, the stranger at Dr. Harrow's surgery, and now the manor's own typewriter, a potential key to the letter's source. Today she would tug at this thread, gently but firmly. Hodges, the butler, greeted her with a bow, his face as impassive as the manor's stone facade. "Lady Ashford is in the conservatory," he said, leading her through a hall adorned with faded portraits. The air smelled of polished wood and old roses, a testament to the manor's grandeur, now tinged with neglect. Miss Marple noted a dusty typewriter on a side table, its cover slightly askew, and her pulse quickened. She would return to it, she decided. After speaking with Lady Ashford, the conservatory was a glass-walled haven, filled with ferns and the faint hum of bees. Lady Ashford sat in a wicker chair, her silver hair catching the light, a book of poetry open on her lap. Her eyes, sharp despite her frail frame, met Miss Marple's with a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Miss Marple," she said, setting the book aside, "your jam is always a delight, but I suspect you're here about more than preserves." Miss Marple smiled, placing the jam on a glass-topped table. "You're quite right, Lady Ashford. I've been troubled by these letters, especially the one you received. May we discuss it?" Lady Ashford's lips tightened, but she nodded, gesturing to a chair. "It's a vile thing," she said, producing the letter from a drawer, accusing me of hiding an heir, as if I'd stooped to such deceit. "My son Edward died in 1918, and my husband left no other children. It's nonsense, but it stings." Miss Marple read the letter again. Its typed words stark against the creamy paper. "Your ladyship's secrets won't stay buried. The village knows of your hidden heir." The red question mark gleamed like a drop of blood. She noted the watermark, identical to the others, and a faint crease, as if the paper had been folded hastily. "This is no idle prank," she said softly. "The writer knows enough to aim high. Have you any enemies, perhaps? Someone with a claim to the estate?" Lady Ashford's eyes flickered, a shadow crossing her face. "There's my nephew, Rupert," she said after a pause. "My late brother's son. He was disinherited years ago after indiscretions, gambling debts, mostly, and a falling out with my husband. He's been in London, or so I thought, but Hodges mentioned seeing him in the village last week." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. A disinherited nephew was a potent motive, especially if he believed himself entitled to the manor. "Has he contacted you?" she asked. "Not directly," Lady Ashford said, "but I've had letters, ordinary ones. Mind you asking about the estate." I ignored them. Rupert's always been bitter, but I can't imagine him stooping to this. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing Rupert's potential. "Might I speak with your secretary, Miss Gale? She handles your correspondence, I believe." Lady Ashford rang a bell, summoning Hodges. "Fetch Miss Gale," she said, then turned to Miss Marple. "She's new, only here a month, but efficient. I doubt she's involved." Miss Gale appeared moments later, a young woman with a pinched face and quick, nervous hands. Her eyes darted between Lady Ashford and Miss Marple, settling on the letter with a flicker of unease. "You wanted me, ma'am?" she asked, her voice clipped. Miss Marple smiled warmly. "Just a few questions, Miss Gale. You use the manners. Typewriter, I understand, for estate matters." "Yes," Miss Gale said, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. "Letters, accounts, that sort of thing." "Why, oh, just curiosity," Miss Marple said lightly. "Typewriters are such clever machines. Is yours kept locked away?" Miss Gale hesitated, her eyes flickering to Lady Ashford. "It's in the library. I don't lock it. There's no need. No one else uses it." Miss Marple's smile didn't waver, but her mind noted the lie. The typewriter she'd seen in the hall was not in the library, and Miss Gale's nerves suggested more than shyness. "Thank you, my dear," she said. "You've been most helpful." As Miss Gale withdrew, Miss Marple steered the conversation to village matters, keeping Lady Ashford at ease. But her thoughts were on Rupert and the typewriter. She needed to see it, to confirm its keys matched the letter's distinct print. Excusing herself to admire the garden, she slipped into the hall, where the typewriter sat unguarded. She lifted the cover, revealing a sleek machine with a fresh ribbon. A quick glance showed a misaligned E, a flaw she'd noticed in the letter's text. Her heart quickened. This was no coincidence. Before she could investigate further, a shadow fell across the hall. A man stood in the doorway, tall and lean, his dark coat dusty from travel. His eyes, shadowed under a low-brimmed hat, fixed on her with a mix of surprise and suspicion. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice rough. Miss Marple turned, her composure unruffled. "Jane Marple, a friend of Lady Ashford's." "And you must be Rupert." He stiffened, his jaw tightening. "What's it to you? I'm here to see my aunt." Of course, she said, her tone mild. But you've chosen a curious time to visit, with these letters troubling the village. Have you received one, perhaps? Rupert's eyes narrowed. I don't know what you're talking about. I've been in London, minding my own business. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on his hands, which bore faint ink stains black, not red, but telling nonetheless. I see, she said. Well, I won't keep you. Lady Ashford's in the conservatory. He brushed past her, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind racing. Rupert's sudden return, his defensiveness, and the typewriter's presence painted a compelling picture, but she needed more. She rejoined Lady Ashford, thanking her for the visit, and promised to return with news. As she left the manor, she encountered the groundskeeper, Mr. Dobbs, raking leaves near the gate. He was a grizzled man, loyal to the manor but fond of gossip. Morning, Miss Marple, he said, tipping his cap. Heard you were poking about those letters. Bad business. That, very bad, she agreed, pausing to admire a rosebush. You must see all sorts here, Mr. Dobbs. Have you noticed anything unusual? Visitors, perhaps. He leaned on his rake, his eyes gleaming. Funny you ask. That nephew, Rupert, was round the other night. Saw him by the post-box in the village. Dropping a stack of letters. Looked shifty, if you ask me. Miss Marple's pulse quickened, but her face remained serene. How interesting, she said. When was this? Tuesday, after dark. I was walking my dog. He didn't see me, but I saw him, clear as day. She thanked him with a smile, her mind fitting the piece into place. Tuesday night aligned with the posting of Mr. Grayson's letter. Rupert was a strong suspect, but his role was unclear. He, the mastermind, or a pawn. The typewriter's misaligned E tied the manner to the letters. But Miss Gale's nerves and Rupert's ink-stained hands suggested a conspiracy, not a lone actor. Back in the village, Miss Marple stopped by the church, where Mrs. Clement was arranging flowers for Sunday's service. The vicar's wife looked weary, her hands trembling as she trimmed a lily. Jane, she said, I'm at my wits' end. Another letter came today, accusing Leonard of misusing church funds. It's tearing us apart. Miss Marple patted her hand, her voice soothing. Courage, Margaret. The writer's growing reckless, and recklessness breeds mistakes. Have you seen Rupert, Lady Ashford's nephew? About Mrs. Clement frowned. Rupert. I saw him yesterday, arguing with Miss Finch outside the post office. He looked angry, and she was near tears. Another thread, Miss Marple thought. Miss Finch's involvement was becoming harder to dismiss. She promised to keep Mrs. Clement informed and left the church, her steps slow as she processed the mornings. Hall, Rupert's return, the typewriter's flaw, Miss Gale's lie, and Dobbs' sighting. The web was tightening, but it was tangled. With too many hands at work at her cottage, she spread her notes on the dining table, adding Rupert's name to her list of suspects. She sketched a map of the village, marking the postbox, the manor, and the post office, the letters posting times late at night. According to Tommy Pierce, and now Mr. Dobbs pointed to someone with freedom to move unseen. Rupert, a visitor, fit the profile, but so did Miss Finch, with her keys to the post office, as she sipped her tea. A memory surfaced, a case from her youth, when a spurned suitor sent anonymous notes to ruin a rival. The motive then was jealousy, but here it felt larger greed, perhaps, or a desire to control the village through fear. Rupert's disinheritance was a compelling motive, but Miss Gale's role, and Miss Finch's, remained murky. The day waned, the sky bruising with clouds. Miss Marple lit her lamp, her knitting untouched as she reviewed the letters. Each bore the same watermark, the same red flourish, but the Manners typewriter was a breakthrough. She would need to confirm its use, perhaps by borrowing a sample from Miss Gale. For now, she felt a quiet satisfaction, like a gardener who'd found the root of a weed. Rupert was a key, but not the only one. The poison pen was clever, but Jane Marple was cleverer, and she would not rest until the Manners' secret hand the writers lay bare. Chapter 5. The tragic turn. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a mournful hush, the sky heavy with clouds that seemed to mirror the village's growing unease. Miss Jane Marple, awake since first light, stood at her kitchen window, her hands cradling a cup of tea gone cold. The letter threatening her, with its taunting red question mark, lay locked in her desk, but its words echoed in her mind. "Keep your nose out, old woman." Far from deterring her, the warning had sharpened her resolve. The poison pen was no mere mischief maker now. The stakes, she sensed, had risen. Her thoughts were interrupted by a frantic knock. She opened the door to find Tommy Pierce, the postman, his cap askew and his face ashen. "Miss Marple," he gasped. "It's Mrs. Symes, the florist. She's dead. Found this morning in her shop. They're saying it's suicide." Miss Marple's heart sank, though her expression remained calm. "Suicide, Tommy. That's a grave claim. Tell me everything you know." He shuffled, his eyes darting nervously. "I was delivering early, and Mr. Dobbs, the groundskeeper, was there, shouting for help. Said he found her in the back room, a bottle of poison by her side and one of those letters in her hand. The constable's there now." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Mrs. Symes, a quiet woman known for her delicate arrangements and gentle smile, was an unlikely candidate for such a desperate act. "Thank you, Tommy," she said, pressing a shilling into his hand. "Go on with your rounds, and say nothing of this to anyone yet." As he pedalled off, Miss Marple gathered her shawl and handbag, slipping the threatening letter inside for safekeeping. She headed toward the florist's shop, a small brick building beside the village green, its window usually bright with dahlias and roses. Today, the blinds were drawn, and a small crowd huddled outside, their whispers sharp with shock. Mr. Pock, the constable, stood guard at the door, his face grim. "Miss Marple," he said, touching his helmet. "Best not go in. It's a sad business, and the coroner's on his way." "I understand," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But I knew Mrs. Symes well. Might I see her, just for a moment, to pay my respects?" Mr. Pock hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside. "Just don't touch anything." Inside, the shop was dim, the air thick with the scent of wilting flowers. Mrs. Symes lay in the back room, slumped in a chair beside a work table strewn with petals. A small vial, its label marked cyanide, sat beside her, and in her hand was a crumpled letter, its red question mark stark against the pale paper. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the scene, noting the untouched tea in a cup, the absence of a note, and a faint smudge on the letter's edge, not red, but a dusty grey, like fingerprint powder. She knelt, her knees protesting, and peered closer. The smudge was irregular, as if someone had brushed against it while the ink was wet. Her gaze swept the room, landing on a pair of scissors, their blades faintly stained with the same grey. "Curious," she murmured, rising as Mr. Pock coughed. Behind her, "Best leave it to the coroner, ma'am," he said. "Looks clear enough. Poor woman couldn't take the shame." Miss Marple's lips pursed. Shame, Mr. Poke. What did the letter say? He flushed, handing her a copy he'd transcribed. Your flowers hide a rotten heart, Mrs. Symes. The village knows you've been stealing from the church collection. Time to face your sins. The words were cruel, but Miss Marple doubted they alone could drive a woman like Mrs. Symes to such an end. She'd known her as a pillar of quiet dignity, devoted to her craft and the church choir. This is troubling, she said, returning the paper, but I wonder cyanide isn't easy to come by. Have you checked her stock, or asked the chemist? Mr. Pock blinked, caught off guard. Not yet, ma'am. I assumed she got it herself. The bottles from a garden supplier, common enough. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her tone mild but her mind unconvinced. She left the shop, her heart heavy but her senses alert. Suicide was too tidy an explanation, and tidy explanations, she knew, often hid messy truths. The village was abuzz as she walked toward the chemist's. A small shop run by Mr. Ellis, a meticulous man with a penchant for order. The bell jingled as she entered, and Mr. Ellis looked up from his counter, his glasses glinting. Miss Marple, he said, terrible news about Mrs. Symes. I can't believe it. Nor I, she said, setting her basket down. I'm helping. The vicar makes sense of these letters, and now this tragedy. Tell me, Mr. Ellis, have you sold any cyanide lately? For gardening, perhaps? He frowned, flipping through a ledger. Cyanides, tightly controlled, you know. I sold a small vial last month, but it was unsigned, just a cash sale. The buyer said it was for pest control at the manor. I thought it was for Mr. Dobbs, but he never confirmed. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. An unsigned sale, linked to the manor, was a thread worth pulling. Did you see the buyer? She asked. Only from behind, he said. Tall, dark coat, hat pulled low. Didn't want to chat. I should have asked more, but it was a busy day. She thanked him, her mind turning to the stranger. Dr. Harrow had mentioned a man in a dark coat, asking about typewriters. The pieces were scattered, but they were beginning to fit. She left the chemist's, her next stop the church, where she hoped to find Mrs. Clement and learn more about Mrs. Symes' state of mind. The church was quiet, its stained glass windows casting jeweled light across the pews. Mrs. Clement was polishing the altar, her movements slow with grief. Jane, she said, her voice breaking, it's too much. First the letters, now this. Mrs. Symes was so kind, so steady. How could she do this? Miss Marple sat beside her, her hand gentle on Mrs. Clement's arm. I'm not certain she did, Margaret. Tell me, when did you last see her? Yesterday afternoon, Mrs. Clement said, wiping her eyes. She brought lilies for the choir stalls. She seemed quiet, but not desperate. She mentioned a letter, though said it upset her, but she wouldn't show it to me. I thought she was just embarrassed. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts on the grey smudge. Did she mention anyone visiting her shop, or anything unusual? Mrs. Clement thought for a moment. She did say a man stopped by, asking to buy flowers for a funeral. She found it odd no one in the village had died recently. He paid in cash and left quickly. A man in a dark coat, perhaps. Miss Marple asked. Mrs. Clement's eyes widened. She didn't say, but it's possible. Oh, Jane, do you think? I think, Miss Marple said, her voice firm, that we must be thorough. Grief, clouds, judgment, but facts clear the way. She left the church, her steps leading her back to the village green, where a small crowd lingered near the florist's shop. Among them was Miss Hartnell, her face pale but composed. Miss Marple, she said, approaching, this is dreadful. First my letter, now poor Mrs. Symes. Is it connected? Very likely, Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. But we mustn't jump to conclusions. Have you seen anyone near her shop lately? A stranger, perhaps? Miss Hartnell frowned. There was someone yesterday evening, near closing time. A man, loitering by the alley. I couldn't see his face. Dark, but he was watching the shop. I thought he was just passing through. Miss Marple's mind sharpened. Another sighting, another dark-coated figure. She thanked Miss Hartnell and moved on, her thoughts turning to Rupert, Lady nephew, his ink-stained hands, his late-night letter dropping, and his ties to the manor made him a prime suspect, but the stranger's presence suggested a broader plot. Was Rupert working alone, or with another? She decided to revisit the post office, hoping to catch Miss Finch off guard. The post office was busy, with villagers collecting mail and whispering about Mrs. Symes. Miss Finch stood behind the counter, her face drawn, her hands sorting letters with mechanical precision. When she saw Miss Marple, her smile was forced. Miss Marple, what brings you back? Just a small errand, Miss Marple said, placing a postcard on the counter. I'm sending this to my nephew, but I couldn't help overhearing the talk about Mrs. Symes. Have any letters come through today? Miss Finch's fingers faltered, dropping a stamp. None like those, she said quickly. It's been quiet, thank goodness. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. I'm glad to hear it. Though I wondered, do you ever notice who uses the postbox at night? It's such a busy spot. Miss Finch's cheeks flushed. I don't watch the box, ma'am. I lock up at 6 and go home. Of course, Miss Marple said, her tone disarming. But as she paid for the stamp, she glanced at the typewriter in the back room, its cover now neatly in place. She recalled Miss Finch's argument with Rupert, as Mrs. Clement had mentioned. There was a connection here, she thought, but it needed careful unravelling. As she left, she passed the village hall, where preparations were underway for the upcoming harvest festival. Mr. Dobbs, the manor's groundskeeper, was unloading pumpkins from a cart. She paused, offering a smile. Hard at work, Mr. Dobbs. The festival will be splendid, I'm sure. He grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. Aye, Miss Marple, though it's hard to focus with all this trouble. Poor Mrs. Symes, I saw her yesterday, you know. She was tidying her shop, humming like always. Didn't seem the type to. He trailed off, shaking his head. Miss Marple nodded, her voice gentle. It's a shock to us all. Did you notice anyone near her shop? You're so observant. He scratched his chin. Come to think of it, I saw that Rupert fellow again, skulking near the green last night. Didn't go into the shop, but he was watching it, like he was waiting for something. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her tone light. How curious. Thank you, Mr. Dobbs. You've a keen eye. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple spread her notes beside the fire, adding the grey smudge, the cyanide sale, and the stranger's sightings to her list. She sketched a timeline of Mrs. Symes' final hours based on Mrs. Clement and Mr. Dobbs' accounts. The letter, the stranger, the cyanide, all pointed to a deliberate act, not a spontaneous one. Suicide was possible, but murder was probable. And Miss Marple trusted her instincts. She recalled a case from years ago, when a village girl had been poisoned, her death staged as despair. The clue then was a mismatched teacup, much like the untouched tea in Mrs. Symes' shop. Someone had been with her, she thought, someone who'd left that grey smudge, perhaps from handling the vial or the scissors. As night fell, she lit her lamp, her knitting untouched. The letters were no longer just a scandal, they were a weapon, and Mrs. Symes was their first casualty. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the inquest, set for tomorrow, where she could press Mr. Polk and the coroner about the cyanide. She would also watch Rupert, whose movements were too suspicious to ignore. She locked her notes away, her heart heavy but her mind clear. The poison pen had drawn blood, but Jane Marple was closing in. The tragic turn had sharpened her focus, and she would not rest until the truth bloomed, as surely as Mrs. Symes' flowers once had. Chapter 6. The trap is set. The morning sun pierced the lingering fog over St. Mary Mead, bathing the village in a deceptive glow of calm. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, a half-eaten scone forgotten beside her tea as she pored over her notes. The death of Mrs. Symes, with its grey-smudged letter and cyanide vial, had cast a pall over the village, and the inquest, held yesterday, had only deepened her conviction. Murder, not suicide, was the truth. The coroner's open verdict left room for doubt, and Miss Marple intended to exploit it. The poison pen had overreached, and she would use their arrogance to draw them out. Her plan, conceived in the quiet hours of dawn, was simple yet bold. A rumour, carefully planted, of a fictitious letter exposing a village secret. If the writer took the bait reacting with panic, or another letter she might reveal themselves. To amplify the ruse, she'd wired her nephew, Raymond West, a writer with a flair for the dramatic, to pose as a journalist investigating the letters. His presence, she hoped, would stir the village's undercurrents, flushing the culprit into the open. A knock announced Raymond's arrival, his suitcase thumping against the doorframe. "Aunt Jane," he said, sweeping in with a grin, "your summons was delightfully cryptic. What's this about poison pens and village intrigue?" Miss Marple smiled, pouring him tea. "Sit, Raymond, and listen carefully. St. Mary Mead is plagued by anonymous letters, vicious, typed, and signed with a red question mark. They've sowed discord, and now, I believe, led to murder. I need your help to set a trap." Raymond's eyes gleamed, his writer's instinct piqued. "Murder? Do tell." She recounted the letters, targets Reverend Clement, Mr. Grayson, Dr. Harrow, Lady Ashford, and poor Mrs. Symes, meeting no detail. The Manor's typewriter, Rupert's ink-stained hands, Miss Finch's nerves, the stranger in the dark. "Coat, the writer is clever," she concluded, "but prideful. They've sent me a warning, which means I'm close. Your role is to play the inquisitive outsider, asking questions, stirring unease. We'll watch who flinches." Raymond nodded, sipping his tea. "I'll be the nosy reporter, then. Where do we start?" "The church, fete this afternoon," she said. "The whole village will be there, suspects included. I'll spread the rumour of a new letter, hinting at a scandal tied to the manor. You circulate, probe, and report back. But be subtle. Raymond, our quarry, is watchful." He saluted mockingly. "Subtlety's my middle name, Aunt Jane. I'll have them spilling secrets by tea time." As Raymond unpacked, Miss Marple donned her hat and shawl, her basket now holding a knitted shawl for the Fates raffle. The village green was already bustling when she arrived, its stalls draped in bunting, the air sweet with toffee apples and cider. Children darted between games, while adults clustered in knots, their laughter brittle with the weight of recent events. Mrs. Price Ridley manned the tambola, her voice booming over the crowd, but her eyes scanned restlessly, as if expecting. Another letter. Miss Marple began her work, pausing at Mrs. Bantry's cake stall. "Dolly," she said, her voice low, I've heard the most alarming thing. Another letter surfaced, claiming a shocking secret about Ashford Manor. Something about a hidden fortune. It's all hush-hush, but I thought you should know. Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened, her hand pausing on a sponge cake. A fortune. Good heavens, Jane, that's explosive. Where did you hear this? Oh, just whispers, Miss Marple said vaguely, her eyes twinkling. But it's bound to cause a stir if it's true. She moved on, planting the seed with Miss Hartnell at the flower stall and Mrs. Clement by the choir tent. Each time tailoring the rumour slightly a stolen legacy, a forged will watching their reactions. Miss Hartnell gasped, clutching her apron, while Mrs. Clement paled, murmuring about the manor's troubled history. The rumour, Miss Marple knew, would spread like wildfire, reaching the writer's ears before dusk. Raymond, meanwhile, worked the crowd with practiced charm, his notebook in hand. He approached Dr. Harrow, who was judging the vegetable contest, and asked about the letter accusing him of negligence. I'm writing a piece on village scandals, Raymond said, his tone casual. Any thoughts on who's behind these letters? Dr. Harrow's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to the crowd. I've no idea, he said curtly. But they're doing real harm, Mrs. Symes. He trailed off, shaking his head. Raymond pressed gently. I heard a rumour about a new letter tied to the manor. Know anything about that? Dr. Harrow's face hardened. Rumours are cheap. I'd stick to facts if I were you. He turned away, but not before Miss Marple, watching from the tea tent, noted his clenched fists. Raymond moved to Miss Finch, who was selling raffle tickets with a distracted air. Miss Finch, he said, flashing a smile, I'm Raymond West, covering the letter scandal. You must see plenty at the post office. Any odd customers lately? Miss Finch's hands froze, her ticket stub tearing slightly. No, she stammered, just the usual. I don't notice much. Not even late-night postings? Raymond asked, his tone teasing. I heard the letters had dropped after dark. Her face drained of colour, and she mumbled an excuse, hurrying to another customer. Miss Marple, sipping tea nearby, marked her reaction. Fear, not just nerves. Miss Finch was hiding something, and Raymond's probing had struck a nerve. The fate hummed on, but tension simmered beneath the gaiety. Miss Marple paused at the fortune-teller's tent, where Mrs. Lestrange, the reclusive widow, sat shrouded in black, reading tarot cards for a small fee. Her presence surprised Miss Marple. Lestrange rarely mingled, but it offered a chance to probe. She slipped inside, offering a coin. Tell my fortune, if you please, she said, settling opposite the widow. Mrs. Lestrange's eyes, shadowed under her veil, studied her. You seek answers, not futures, she said, her voice low and husky. She shuffled the cards, laying out 3, the Tower, the Magician, and the Hanged Man. A fall, a deceiver, and a sacrifice. You walk a dangerous path, Miss Marple. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. So I've been told. Have you received a letter, Mrs. Lestrange, or perhaps sent one? The widow's hands stilled, her gaze sharp. I keep to myself, but I hear things. The manor's name is whispered too often lately. Look there for your answers. Miss Marple thanked her, leaving the tent with a shiver. Mrs. Lestrange's words, cryptic yet pointed, reinforced her focus on Ashford Manor. She spotted Rupert, Lady Ashford's nephew, near the cider stall, his dark coat blending with the crowd. He was speaking to Miss Weatherby, the tea-shop owner, their heads bent close. Miss Marple signalled Raymond, who sauntered over, notebook ready. Mr. Rupert? Is it? Raymond said, interrupting. I'm a journalist, looking into the letters plaguing the village. Heard you've been back a while. Any thoughts on who's behind them? Rupert's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening on his glass. I don't meddle in village nonsense, he said coldly. You'd do well to leave it alone. And you, Miss Weatherby, Raymond pressed, turning to her. Your tea shop's a gossip hub. Hear anything about a new letter, maybe tied to the manor? Miss Weatherby's face flushed, her apron twisting in her hands. I don't listen to gossip, she snapped, and I've work to do. She hurried, off leaving Rupert to glare at Raymond before stalking away. Miss Marple, watching from a distance, noted their reactions. Rupert's hostility, Miss Weatherby's panic. Her rumour was working, stirring the guilty like leaves in a wind. She joined Raymond at the tea tent, where he recounted his encounters. Miss Finch nearly bolted, he said, and Rupert's got a temper. Miss Weatherby's hiding something. Too did you see her hand shake? I did, Miss Marple said, her voice low. You've done well, Raymond. Now, keep circulating. Watch for anyone acting oddly, especially if they mention the manor. As Raymond moved off, Miss Marple settled on a bench, her knitting in hand, though her needles lay still. She observed the crowd, her eyes catching Mrs. Price Ridley's pursed lips as she whispered to Mr. Grayson and Lady Ashford, regal but tense, chatting with Dr. Harrow. The fete was a stage, and each player revealed their role through glances and silences. The afternoon waned, the sun dipping behind the church spire. Miss Marple was about to leave when Tommy Pierce, the postman, approached, his face flushed with excitement. Miss Marple, he whispered, I found another letter in the postbox, just now. It's for you. Her heart quickened, but her face remained serene. Thank you, Tommy, she said, taking the envelope. It bore the familiar typed script, the red question mark, bold as ever. She slipped it into her handbag, promising herself to read it in private. Was it posted today? He said. I checked the box at noon, so it's fresh. Someone's bold, doing it during the fete. She thanked him, her mind racing. The letter was proof her trap had worked. The writer had reacted, unable to resist taunting her again. She returned to her cottage, the fate's music fading behind her, and lit her lamp, spreading the new letter on her table. Its words were sharp, laced with venom. Your little games won't save you, meddler. The manor's secrets are mine to keep, and you'll pay for prying. Miss Marple's lips curved, in a faint smile. The writer had taken the bait, mentioning the manor as she'd hoped. Their anger was a crack in their armour, and she would widen it. She added the letter to her collection, noting its crisp paper and the same watermark as before, the grey smudge. On Mrs. Symes's letter came to mind perhaps a clue to the writer's haste, or a trace of their tools. She reviewed her suspects, Rupert, with his manor ties and late-night postings, Miss Finch, whose panic betrayed her, Miss Weatherby, with her inky apron and evasive eyes, and Miss Gale, the manor secretary, whose lie about the typewriter lingered. Mrs. Lestrange's cryptic warning added another layer, but her role was unclear. The stranger in the dark coat, seen at the chemist's in Mrs. Symes's shop, was a shadow she couldn't yet grasp. Raymond returned at dusk, his notebook filled with observations. The village is buzzing with your rumour, he said, sprawling in her armchair. Mrs. Price Ridley's convinced it's about a stolen inheritance. Dr. Harrow clammed up when I mentioned the manor, and Miss Hartnell nearly fainted when I asked about Rupert. You've got them all on edge. Good, Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. A rattled mind makes mistakes. Tomorrow we'll push further. I'll visit the manor again, and you'll call on Miss Finch. Ask about her argument with Rupert. Mrs. Clement saw them together. Raymond grinned. You're a mastermind, Aunt Jane. I almost pitied the poor fool who crossed you. She chuckled, but her heart was heavy. Mrs. Syme's death was a wound, and the letter's poison threatened more. She locked her notes away, her knitting untouched as she gazed into the fire. The trap was set, and the writer had stepped into it. Jane Marple felt the net tightening, and she would not let it slip until the poison pen was caught, its venom drained at last. Chapter 7. The hidden Aletha. Morning mist draped St. Mary Mead in a ghostly veil, softening the village's edges as Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour window, her knitting needles idle in her lap. The latest poison pen letter, with its venomous taunt about the manor's secrets, lay locked in her desk, its red ? A silent challenge. Her trap, set at the church fete with a rumour of a fictitious letter, had worked. The writer had reacted, revealing their obsession with Ashford Manor, but the mystery was far from solved, and Mrs. Syme's death, staged as suicide, weighed heavily on her heart. Miss Marple knew she was close, but the web of suspense Rupert, Miss Finch, Miss Weatherby, Miss Gale, and the elusive stranger demanded a deft hand to untangle. A soft knock broke her reverie. She opened the door to find Clara, her former maid, now employed at Ashford Manor. Clara's round face, usually bright with cheer, was pinched with worry, her hands twisting a faded shawl. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice low, "I need to speak with you. It's urgent, and I didn't know who else to trust." Miss Marple ushered her inside, offering a chair by the fire. "Clara, my dear, you look frightened. What's happened?" Clara hesitated, glancing at the window as if expecting pursuit. "It's those awful letters, ma'am. I've heard things at the manor, things I can't keep quiet about no more. I think they're tied to Mrs. Syme's death." Miss Marple's pulse quickened, but her voice remained calm. "Tell me everything from the beginning." Clara took a shaky breath. "Last week I was cleaning the library late after Miss Gale had gone home. I heard voices in the study. Rupert, Lady Ashford's nephew, and Miss Finch from the post office. They didn't know I was there, behind the screen. Rupert was angry, saying Miss Finch wasn't moving fast enough with the letters. She said she'd done her part, but he wanted more, something about discrediting Lady Ashford so he could claim the estate. They mentioned a plan to make it look like she was hiding an heir." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her mind fitting Clara's words into the puzzle. Rupert's motive, greed for the manor, was clear, but Miss Finch's role was a revelation. "Did they say anything about Mrs. Symes?" she asked. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Not by name, ma'am, but Rupert said something chilling. He said, if anyone gets too close, we'll handle it like we did before." Miss Finch went quiet, like she was scared. I think they meant her." Miss Marple patted Clara's hand, her heart heavy but her resolve firm. "You've been very brave, Clara. Did you hear anything else? About a typewriter, perhaps, or a stranger?" Clara nodded. "Rupert mentioned a machine in the manor study, said it was perfect for their work, and Miss Finch talked about a man helping them sell one from outside, who knew how to get things. I didn't catch his name, but she called him the Shadow." Miss Marple's thoughts raced. The Shadow could be the stranger in the dark coat seen at the chemist's in Mrs. Syme's shop. The typewriter, with its misaligned E, tied the manor to the letters, and Miss Finch's involvement explained her nerves at the post office. "You've given me much to work with," she said. "But you must be careful, Clara. If they suspect you've overheard, you could be in danger." Clara shivered but squared her shoulders. "I'll keep quiet, ma'am." But I couldn't let this go on. Mrs. Symes was kind to me, always giving me flowers for my mum's grave. Miss Marple smiled, her admiration for Clara's courage warming her. "You've done right, my dear. Now, go back to the manor and act as if nothing's changed. I'll handle the rest." As Clara left, slipping into the mist, Miss Marple returned to her notes, adding Clara's testimony, Rupert and Miss Finch's plot, the shadow, the manor's typewriter. The web was clearer now, but proof was needed, hard evidence to tie them to the letters and Mrs. Symes' murder. She decided to verify Miss Finch's past, suspecting a history of deceit might explain her willingness to conspire. For this, she needed Sir Henry Clethering, her old friend from Scotland Yard, whose connections could unearth hidden truths. She penned a letter to Sir Henry, careful to disguise her urgency as a friendly inquiry. "Dear Henry," she wrote, "St. Mary Mead is troubled by a small matter of anonymous letters, and I find myself curious about one of our residents, Miss Emily Finch, the postmistress. If your records hold anything about her past employment, perhaps, or minor indiscretions, I'd be most grateful. Yours, Jane." She sealed it and entrusted it to Tommy Pierce, who promised to post it express. With the letter sent, Miss Marple turned her attention to the village, where the aftermath of the Fates rumour still lingered. She donned her hat and shawl, her basket now holding a loaf of her homemade bread, a pretext for visiting Miss Weatherby at the tea shop. The copper kettle was quiet, its tables half empty, a sign of the village's unease. Miss Weatherby stood behind the counter, her sharp eyes dulled by fatigue, her apron free of ink stains today. "Miss Weatherby," Miss Marple said, offering the bread, "I thought you might need cheering after all this trouble." The fate was lovely, despite the whispers. Miss Weatherby's smile was strained. "Thank you, Miss Marple. It's been difficult. Folks are scared to talk, afraid they'll get a letter next." Miss Marple nodded, settling at a corner table. "I heard a rumour at the Fate, something about a new letter tied to the manor. Have you heard anything?" Miss Weatherby's hands froze on a teapot, her eyes darting to the door. "Nothing solid," she said quickly. "Just gossip. I don't pay it mind." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her gaze gentle but probing. "Of course. Though I wonder, have you seen Rupert about? He's been visiting the manor, I hear." Miss Weatherby's face tightened. "He was in yesterday, bought a scone. Didn't stay long." "Why?" "Oh, just curious," Miss Marple said lightly. "He's a stranger to most of us, and strangers draw attention in times like these." Miss Weatherby busied herself with a tray, her silence telling. Miss Marple left a coin and departed, her suspicions about Miss Weatherby's reticence growing. The tea shop owner's panic at the Fate, coupled with her earlier ink-stained apron, kept her on the suspect list, though her role was less clear. Then Miss Finch, single quotes. Next Miss Marple visited Raymond, who was staying at the Blue Boar Inn, drafting his article to maintain his cover. He greeted her with a grin, his notebook open on the table. "Aunt Jane, the village is a powder keg. Your rumours got everyone jumping. I spoke to Dr. Harrow against his cagey about the manor, like he knows something but won't say. And Miss Hartnell swears she saw Rupert near the postbox again last night." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Excellent, Raymond. Now I need you to visit Miss Finch. Ask about her argument with Rupert, Mrs. Clement, saw them outside the post office. Be gentle, but don't let her dodge. Raymond saluted. On it, anything else? Watch for anyone following you, she said, her voice low. The writer knows I'm close, and they may suspect you're helping me. He nodded, his grin fading. I'll be careful, Aunt Jane. As Raymond set off, Miss Marple returned home, her thoughts on Clara's revelation, the shadow. Intrigued her a third player, perhaps the stranger who'd bought cyanide and visited Mrs. Syme's shop. She needed to trace him, but without a name or face, it was a challenge. She decided to revisit the chemist, Mr. Ellis, hoping to jog his memory. The chemist's shop was busy, with villagers buying tonics and whispering about Mrs. Symes. Mr. Ellis looked harried, but greeted her warmly. Miss Marple back so soon, still on about those letters. I'm afraid so, she said, placing her basket on the counter. I've been thinking about that cyanide sale you mentioned. The man in the dark coat, did he say anything else? A name, perhaps, or where he was staying? Mr. Ellis rubbed his chin, his brow furrowing. Not much, I'm afraid. He paid. In cash, kept his head down. But he did mention catching a train to Much Benham later that day. Said he had business there. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Much Benham was where the ink receipt from Grayson's shop had originated. Thank you, Mr. Ellis, she said. You've been most helpful. She left, her mind turning too much. Benham, a trip there might yield clues, but for now she focused on Sir Henry's reply. She expected it by tomorrow, given the express post. In the meantime, she decided to attend the evening choir practice where she could observe Miss Finch and gauge the village's mood. The church was aglow with candlelight when she arrived, the choir's voices rising in a hymn. Miss Finch sat in the back pew, her hands clasped tightly, her face pale. Miss Marple slipped in beside her, offering a smile. A lovely evening. For singing, Miss Finch, she said, though I imagine you're weary with all the post office work. Miss Finch started, her eyes darting to Miss Marple. It's manageable, she said, her voice thin, just keeping busy. Miss Marple nodded, her tone gentle. I heard you had a visitor recently, Rupert, from the manor. He's quite a presence, isn't he? Miss Finch's hands tightened, her knuckles white. He just needed stamps, she said quickly. Nothing more. Of course, Miss Marple said, her eyes kind but piercing. She let the silence stretch. Watching Miss Finch squirm, then turned her attention to the choir, satisfied she'd planted a seed of unease. After practice, she lingered, chatting with Mrs. Clement, who mentioned a new letter to Mr. Grayson, accusing him of selling tainted goods. It's relentless, Mrs. Clement said, her voice trembling. When will it stop? Soon, Miss Marple promised, her resolve hardening. She returned home, where a telegram from Sir Henry awaited, delivered by Tommy Pearce. It was brief, but illuminating. Emily Finch, postmistress, dismissed from a London post office in 1924, petty fraud, forged receipts, misdirected mail, no charges filed, discreet as requested. Henry. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. Miss Finch's past explained her susceptibility to Rupert's scheme. Fraud was familiar territory. She added the telegram to her notes, sketching a new web. Rupert, driven by greed. Miss Finch, his coerced ally. The shadow, a hired hand, perhaps for the cyanide. The manor's typewriter was the linchpin, and Mrs. Syme's death the plots. Darkest turn as night fell. Miss Marple lit her lamp, her knitting untouched. Clara's courage had been a gift, and Sir Henry's information a key. She felt the net closing, each thread ink smudges, lies drawing her nearer to the truth. Tomorrow she would confront Miss Finch, armed with her past, and press Rupert at the manor. The hidden ally had lit the path, and Jane Marple would follow it, undaunted, until the poisoned pen was silenced. Chapter 8. The confrontation. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over St. Mary Mead, gilding the vicarage's rose beds as Miss Jane Marple approached its gate. Her basket, now holding a tin of her prized shortbread, was a pretext for the gathering. She'd orchestrated delicate trap to unmask the poison pen. Clara's confession about Rupert and Miss Finch's scheme, coupled with Sir Henry Clithering's revelation of Miss Finch's fraudulent past, had given her the leverage she needed. The typewriter's misaligned E, the grey smudge on Mrs. Symes's letter, and the unsigned cyanide purchase were threads she would weave into a net, and tonight she would draw it tight. The vicarage parlour was warm, its chintz curtains drawn against the evening chill. Reverend Clement greeted her with a weary smile, his face etched with the strain of recent letters. "Miss Marple," he said, "your idea to bring us together is kind, but I fear it may stir more discord." "Sometimes," she replied, her eyes twinkling, "a little stirring clears the mud." She set her shortbread on the tea-table, her gaze sweeping the room as guests arrived. Mrs. Price Ridley, her fox fur bristling; Dr. Harrow, his jaw tight; Mr. and Mrs. Grayson, clinging to each other; Miss Hartnell, her hands twisting a handkerchief; Lady Ashford, regal but tense; Rupert, his dark coat stark against the pastel decor; Miss Gale, the manor secretary, her eyes darting nervously; and Miss Finch, pale and rigid, her fingers clutching her purse. Miss Weatherby and Mrs. Lestrange had declined, citing prior engagements, but Miss Marple noted their absence with interest. Mrs. Clement poured tea, her hands trembling slightly. "We're here to discuss harmony," she said, her voice faltering. "These letters have hurt us all, and Miss Marple thought a frank talk might help." Mrs. Price Ridley huffed, brandishing her letter. "Harmony, when I'm accused of cheating. At whist I want justice, not tea." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Miss Hartnell whispered, "My school's reputation is ruined." Mr. Grayson added, "My shop's empty because of these lies." The air crackled with resentment, and Miss Marple, sipping her tea, let it build, knowing tension loosened tongues. She rose, her small figure commanding silence. "My friends," she said, her voice soft but clear, "these letters are no mere prank. They've sown fear, ruined livelihoods, and, I believe, led to murder. Mrs. Symes's death was no suicide, and the writer or writers must answer for it." The room froze, eyes widening. Rupert shifted in his chair, his fingers tightening on his cup. Miss Finch's face drained of colour, her purse slipping to the floor. Miss Marple continued, her tone measured. "The letters share a flaw typewriter, with a misaligned E, which I found at Ashford Manor. They also bear a watermark from a local stationer, and a red question mark, a theatrical touch. But it's the grey smudge on Mrs. Symes's letter that points to her killer." Dr. Harrow frowned. "A smudge? What does that prove?" Miss Marple smiled faintly, producing a folded paper from her handbag, a sample she'd borrowed from the manor study. "Typed by Miss Gale under the guise of a charity letter. This was typed on the manor's machine," she said, holding it up. "Note the E slightly raised. It matches every letter, including the one found with Mrs. Symes. Someone with access to that typewriter wrote them." Lady Ashford stiffened, My typewriter. That's absurd. Miss Gale uses it for estate work, and I trust her. Miss Gale flushed, her voice shrill. I've done nothing wrong. I type what I'm told, that's all. Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her words were steel. I'm sure you're honest, Miss Gale, but someone else used it, perhaps at night, when the manor slept. And there's more. She turned to Miss Finch, who shrank under her scrutiny. Miss Finch, you've been most helpful at the post office, but your past tells another story. In 1920, you were dismissed from a London post office for fraud-forged receipts, misdirected mail. It's no coincidence the letters passed through your hands. Miss Finch gasped, her hands flying to her face. That's a lie. I've done nothing, Rupert interrupted, his voice cold. This is nonsense, Miss Marple. You're grasping at straws, accusing innocent people. Where's your proof? Miss Marple's eyes met his, unflinching. Proof, Mr. Rupert. I have a witness who overheard you and Miss Finch plotting in the manor's study, discussing letters to discredit Lady Ashford for your gain. You were seen posting letters at night, your hands stained with ink, and the cyanide that killed Mrs. Symes, purchased by a man in a dark coat, linked to the manor where you've been staying. The room erupted in gasps. Mrs. Price, Ridley pointed at Rupert. I knew he was trouble. Skulking about like a thief. Rupert's face darkened, his fists clenching. You've no right to accuse me. I came to visit my aunt, nothing more. Miss Finch, tell them. Miss Finch's eyes darted to him, then away, her voice trembling. I don't know what you're talking about. I just sought the mail. Miss Marple stepped closer, her voice low but piercing. Miss Finch, you argued with Rupert outside the post office. You were heard planning to ruin Lady Ashford's reputation, hoping to force her out. But Mrs. Symes grew suspicious, didn't she? She saw some finger letter, perhaps, or a stranger in your company, and you silenced her. Miss Finch sobbed, shaking her head. No, I didn't kill her. It wasn't me. Then who? Miss Marple pressed, her gaze unrelenting. The grey smudge on her letter matches the powder on her scissors, handled by someone in haste. Your fingerprints, Miss Finch, were found on the cyanide vial, lifted by Mr. Pock at my suggestion. You can't deny it. Miss Finch collapsed into her chair, her sobs racking her frame. It was an accident, she whispered. I didn't mean to. Rupert said we just needed to scare her, to keep her quiet. He gave me the vial, said it was safe in small doses, but she drank it all. The room fell silent, horror etched on every face. Rupert lunged to his feet, his voice a snarl. She's lying. I had nothing to do with it. She's the one who wrote the letters, not me. Miss Finch's head snapped up, her eyes blazing through tears. You liar. You told me what to write, where to send them. You wanted the manor, and I was just a tool. Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice cutting through the chaos. Enough. You've both betrayed yourselves. Miss Finch, you typed the letters on the manor's machine, using your post office access to distribute them. Rupert, you supplied the cyanide, driven by greed for the estate. Your shadow, the stranger in the dark coat, bought it for you, didn't he? Rupert's face twisted, but he said nothing, his silence damning. Mr. Pock, who'd slipped in during the confrontation, stepped forward, his face grim. Miss Finch, Mr. Rupert, you'll come with me. The magistrate will sort this out. Miss Finch rose, her sobs quieting to a dull whimper, and followed Mr. Pock. Rupert hesitated, his eyes locked on Miss Marple, a mix of rage and fear in his gaze. "You'll regret this, old woman," he muttered. But he went without resistance. The fight drained from him. The room exhaled, tension giving way to stunned relief. Mrs. Clement clutched her husband's hand, tears in her eyes. "Jane," she said, "how did you know?" Miss Marple smiled, her voice gentle. "People are much the same, Margaret. Greed, fear, pride. They leave traces, like footprints in snow. I only followed them." Lady Ashford approached, her face pale but composed. "I owe you a debt, Miss Marple. Rupert's betrayal. It cuts deep, but better to know the truth." Miss Marple patted her arm. "Truth heals, Lady Ashford, though it stings at first." As the guests dispersed, whispering in awe, Miss Marple lingered, helping Mrs. Clement clear the tea things. Raymond West, who'd arrived late and stood quietly by the door, joined her, his notebook tucked away. "Aunt Jane," he said, "you're a marvel. I thought I'd seen it all, but that was a must." She chuckled, stacking cups. "It's only observation, Raymond, and a bit of patience." He raised an eyebrow. "And a typewriter's E. You had them cornered from the start." "Not quite," she admitted, her eyes distant. "Miss Finch's arrest is a victory, but Rupert's role isn't fully clear. He supplied the cyanide, yes, but the shadow, the stranger remains at large. And I wonder if Rupert acted alone in his greed." Raymond frowned. "You think there's more?" "There's always more," she said, her voice soft. "Human nature is never tidy." She left the vicarage, the night air cool against her face. The village was quiet, its lights dimmed, but Miss Marple's mind was alight. Miss Finch's confession and arrest were a triumph, but the mystery's roots ran deeper. Rupert's silence, the stranger's absence, and the manor's lingering secrets nagged at her. She returned home, locking her door against the dark, and spread her notes by the fire. The letters, with their misaligned E and red flourishes, lay in a neat stack, their venom spent but their story unfinished. She added Miss Finch's confession and the fingerprint evidence, her handwriting precise. The grey smudge, the cyanide vial, the ink receipt from Much Benamor had led to this moment. But the shadow was a loose thread, and Rupert's full motive greed, yes. But perhaps more eluded her. She recalled a case from her youth, when a village feud ended in poison, the mastermind hidden behind a puppet. Rupert felt like a puppet, pulled by strings she couldn't yet see. Tomorrow she would visit the manor again, pressing Rupert before his transfer to the magistrate. The confrontation had cracked the web, but Jane Marple knew spiders hid in shadows, and she would not rest until every strand was exposed. Chapter 9. The Final Truth. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns across her parlour floor. She sat at her writing desk, her notes spread before her like a map of St. Mary Mead's darkest secrets. Miss Finch's arrest last night had been a triumph. Her tearful confession exposing her role in the poison pen letters and Mrs. Syme's murder. Yet, as Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts lingered on Rupert, Lady Ashford's nephew, his silence at the vicarage, his ink-stained hands, and his veiled threat, "T'll regret this." Old woman suggested a deeper culpability. The shadow, the stranger in the dark coat, remained at large, and Miss Marple knew the web was not fully unravelled until every thread was secured. She donned her best tweed coat and hat, her basket holding a jar of quince jelly as a pretext for her final visit to Ashford Manor. Today, She would confront Rupert before his transfer to the magistrate, determined to extract the truth about his motives and the mysterious stranger. The village was hushed as she walked, its residents subdued by the news of Miss Finch's arrest. The air carried a faint chill, autumn's breath sharpening the scent of fallen leaves. At Ashford Manor, Hodges, the butler, admitted her with a sombre nod. "Lady Ashford is indisposed," he said, "but Mr. Rupert is in the library. He's packing to leave, under Mr. Polk's watch." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "I'd like a word with him, Hodges, if I may." Alone, Hodges hesitated, then led her to the library, a grand room lined with leather-bound books and heavy oak furniture. Rupert stood by a window, his dark coat draped over a chair, his suitcase half packed with papers and clothes. His face, shadowed by stubble, turned to her with a scowl. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice cold, "come to gloat." She settled into an armchair, her basket at her feet, her expression serene but unyielding. "Not at all, Mr. Rupert. I've come for the truth. Miss Finch has confessed her part typing the letters, distributing them through the post office, even poisoning Mrs. Symes, though she claims it was an accident. But you, I believe, were the architect. Shall we discuss it?" Rupert's eyes narrowed, his fingers tightening on a book. "You've got your culprit. Why harass me? I'm leaving this cursed village." Miss Marple's gaze held his steady as stone. "Because the letters began with you, didn't they? Your greed for Ashford Manor, your disinheritance it drove. You to destabilize the village, to weaken Lady Ashford's standing. You supplied the cyanide, knowing Miss Finch lacked the nerve to kill deliberately. But there's more, isn't there? A third player, the man in the dark coat, your shadow. Who is he?" Rupert laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the quiet room. "You're fishing, old woman. There's no one else. Finch acted alone, and you've got her." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft but cutting. "Don't mistake me for a fool, Mr. Rupert. Clara overheard you in this very study, plotting with Miss Finch to ruin your aunt. Mr. Dobbs saw you posting letters at night. The cyanide vial, purchased in Much Benham by a man in a dark coat, bears your fingerprints. Not Miss Finch's eye had missed a pock check this morning, and the ink receipt from Grayson's shop. It matches the black ink you used to draft the letters before Miss Finch typed them. You're caught, Rupert, but I want the whole truth. Who is the shadow?" Rupert's face paled, his bravado crumbling. He sank into a chair, his hands shaking. "You're relentless," he muttered. "Fine, I'll tell you, but it won't change anything." Miss Marple waited, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap, a rhythm to steady the tension. Rupert ran a hand through his hair, his voice low. "It started with the manor. I was cheated out of it my father's share, my birthright. Aunt Margaret wouldn't budge, so I came back to force her hand. The letters were my idea, to stir up scandal, make her look unfit to manage the estate. Finch was easy to manipulate. She'd been caught stealing before, and I had leverage. I wrote the drafts, she typed them on the manners machine, and we posted them at night. And Mrs. Symes," Miss Marple asked, her tone gentle but probing. Rupert's eyes darkened. "She was a mistake. She saw me with Finch at the post office, overheard us arguing about the letters. She started asking questions, digging into the manor's records. I told Finch to scare her with a letter, but she panicked, slipped cyanide into her tea. I gave her the vial, yes, but I didn't think she'd go that far." Miss Marple's heart ached for Mrs. Symes, but her focus held. "And the shadow, The man who bought the cyanide. Rupert hesitated, his gaze flicking to the window. His name's Carver, a fixer from London, someone I knew from my gambling days. He got the cyanide, no questions asked, and delivered it to me. He's long gone, now back to the city, out of your reach. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the name. Carver, the shadow, was a loose end, but Rupert's confession was the key she needed. You planned to ruin your aunt. She said, to force her to sell or name you heir. But you underestimated the village and me. Rupert's laugh was bitter. I underestimated Finch's cowardice. And your meddling. You think you've won, but Carver's untouchable. He's a ghost. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, rising. But ghosts leave traces, and you've left plenty. The typewriter, the ink, the fingerprints, they all point to you. Mr. Pork is waiting outside, and I've asked Sir Henry Clithering to alert Scotland Yard about Carver. Your web is broken, Rupert. He slumped, his defiance spent. Do what you must, he said, his voice hollow. I'm done here. Miss Marple signalled Hodges, who summoned Mr. Pork. The constable entered, his face stern, and escorted Rupert to the waiting police car. As they left, Lady Ashford appeared, her silver hair gleaming in the hall's dim light. Jane, she said, her voice trembling, is it over? Miss Marple took her hand, her touch warm. It is Margaret, Rupert, and Miss Finch are in custody, and the letters will stop. Your manor is safe. Lady Ashford's eyes glistened. I never thought Rupert capable of such evil. Thank you, Jane. Miss Marple smiled, her heart lightening. Evil thrives in shadows, but light finds it out. She left the manor, the gravel crunching under her feet, and walked back to the village, her basket swinging lightly. The sky was clear now. The clouds parted to reveal a pale autumn sun. St. Mary Mead seemed to breathe again, its streets alive with the chatter of children and the clatter of a milk cart. She stopped at the church, where Mrs. Clement was tending. The roses, her face brighter than it had been in weeks. Jane, she said, the news is all over the village. Miss Finch and Rupert rested. Is it really finished? It is, Miss Marple said, her voice soft. The poison pen is silenced, and Mrs. Syme's killer is caught. Though I've asked Sir Henry to track a man named Carver, a minor accomplice. He's fled, but he'll be found. Mrs. Clement hugged her, tears of relief in her eyes. You're a miracle, Jane. The village owes you everything. Miss Marple chuckled, waving off the praise. I only watched and listened, Margaret. People reveal themselves, if you give them time. She returned to her cottage, where Raymond West awaited, his suitcase packed for his return to London. Aunt Jane, he said, grinning, you've outdone yourself. I'm half tempted to write this up as a novel. You'll do no such thing, she said, her eyes twinkling. The village has had enough drama. But do visit soon, Raymond. I'll miss your help. He kissed her cheek, promising to return for Christmas, and left in a taxi, his notebook brimming with notes he'd never publish. Miss Marple settled by her fire, her knitting in hand at last. She spread her notes one final time, reviewing the case. The letters, misaligned E, the grey smudge, the cyanide vial, Clara's courage, Sir Henry's telegram, and Rupert's confession. Each piece had locked into place, forming a picture of greed and betrayal. She recalled a case from her girlhood, when a spurned heir poisoned a rival, thinking himself untouchable. Rupert had been no different, his ambition blinding him to the village's resilience, and her own. Carver, the shadow, was a shadow indeed, but Scotland Yard would find him, she trusted. For now, St. Mary Mead was whole again, its wounds beginning to heal. She locked her notes away, her desk drawer closing with a soft click. The letters, with their red question marks, would be handed to Mr. Pock for evidence, their venom spent. She picked up her knitting, the lavender scarf nearing completion, its stitches neat and sure. Outside, the village hummed with life, its harmony restored. Miss Marple leaned back, her eyes drifting to the garden, where her roses bloomed despite the autumn chill. Human nature, she thought, was as predictable as it was frail greed, fear, and pride, always leaving footprints. She had followed them, as she always did, and brought the truth to light. With a contented sigh, she sipped her tea, warm at last, and let the peace of St. Mary Mead envelop her. The poisoned pen was no more, and Jane Marple, for now, was at rest.